Good evening all and welcome. As voted by you tonight, we are heading to the gas station for a collection of creepy stories. Don't forget that in tonight's video, we only have 3 ads for a much better listening experience. And don't forget to download our app, follow us on social media, and check out new videos every other day. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I used to work closing shift at a certain unnamed fast food franchise. Because of this, my co-workers and I would generally clock out together around midnight. I consider myself friends with all of my closing co-workers, so during the summertime, we got into the habit of staying after work in the parking lot to just chat and hang about. The restaurant is in a generally nice neighborhood with regularly patrolling cops, and we are right next to our cars, so we never felt unsafe. One night we're talking to each other for 2 hours or so I get into my car to leave at around 2 in the morning. This was probably really stupid of me, but my heart clenched as I realized that my gas light was on, and had been while I drove to work earlier that day. I reasoned with myself that I likely wouldn't have enough gas to get home and then drive out again next morning to get some. So against my better judgment and my nerves, I resigned myself to drive to the Circle K 2 streets over. This was still a nice neighborhood, and my only other option for gas was a station that doubled as a truck stop and a Greyhound stop, so that one scared me more. Looking back, I probably should have just asked my co-worker to come with me, and then this wouldn't have happened. As I pulled up to the pump and closed the door, I noticed that the only other car at the pumps belonged to a middle-aged man, probably in his 40s. He made me look nervous, but didn't come near me or try to talk to me, so I wasn't exactly scared. The gas attendant was a woman, so that made me feel a little less nervous. I asked where the bathrooms were, and when I got out of them, the other man was gone. I thanked the attendant on my way out of the station room, and as I walked towards my car, I heard a man call out to me, "Hey miss." I look over and there's a man coming out of the garbage corral. "Can you come over here?" I noticed that he wasn't in uniform, not that it would have made the situation better, so I could tell he didn't work there. At this point, I was next to my car at the well-lit gas pump. "No," I called out, and even I heard how anxious I sounded. He began walking over to my car. Now I'd just be satisfied at filling my tank halfway. I feel for my back pocket where I usually keep my phone, and it isn't there. I panicked. I figured I forgot it inside my car, but don't want to look in case the guy is paying close attention to that. "Nice night out, isn't it?" he says. He stepped into the pump area, still a few yards away, and I mutter out a nervous, "Yeah," in the hopes he leaves me alone. He doesn't. "How old are you?" Now, I'd been scared for the entire interaction, but brand new warning alarms were going off in my head as I blurted out, "I'm 16. I'm not, I'm actually 19. But I didn't want him to know that. I thought if he thought I was a minor, he'd leave me alone. He looked at me with narrow eyes and began to say, "Oh well, you look..." He cuts himself off. He was going to say he thought I looked older. I'm satisfied with the amount of gas in my car, so I start getting the pump gun back and leaving it in place. "How's your night, miss?" I tell him it's fine and ask how his has been. My tone is still very nervous and I'm only answering because I'm getting into my car, and I've been conditioned to be polite above all else. He's scarily close to the car, inching closer, maybe 5 feet away now. He looks at me, and then walks away. I lock my car immediately and start to get ready to go. He wasn't anywhere in the parking lot when I looked up, so I figure he left. Either way, I hightail it out of there. As I'm leaving, I pay attention to behind me, and as I pass the building, I see him standing flush against the side of a building watching me leave. I was still shaking when I parked in my driveway, but although I knew there was no way he could have followed me home, it still stuck with me. I know that the situation where I was either going to was probably trafficked or raped or next to a dumpster. I'm an 18-year-old female, working the 4 p.m. to midnight shift alone at a gas station convenience store in Canada. Because the location of my place of work is right next to a highway, it's common for people to settle into the parking lot for a while, or even the entire night. What isn't common is when someone parks right outside the window beside the cash register, parallel to the building. It was around 11 p.m., and I'm preparing to close my shift, excited to go home and rest. Keep in mind I'm only 18 and still live with my parents. A rush of customers comes and goes when I notice a car parked outside. Right beside the cash register, there is a huge window. In order for the workers to look out to see the customers at the pumps, many people have parked there before, but none have ever parked parallel to the store, snuggled up to the curb. Whatever, I thought. Maybe the man or woman is just exhausted. 11:30 rolls around, and the car is still parked there. I had to go outside to shut the oil shack, which appears to have been right next to where the car was parked. As I closed the shack, I looked into the car and see the driver's seat reclined, all the way back with a man laying back, with a smirk on his face. I rushed inside and got behind the counter. Right as one of my regulars walked in, I pointed out the man in the car, joking that he's waiting for me. The regular seemed worried, telling me to call the cops. He said to stay safe, but that he had to get back to work. I decided against calling the cops because the guy could have easily just been resting after a long haul. At around 11:45, I decided to call my sister because the guy was still outside. We live about 15 minutes from my workplace, a perfect amount of time for her to get there for closing. I told her the lowdown, which she responded that she was leaving at that moment and would be there soon. At 11:48, the guy gets out the car. I'm closing in less than 10, and now he decides he wants a snack? As I watch him, I notice he's walking around near the pump, staring off into the sky, probably looking at the cameras. 10:50. Now he walks into the store, not returning my greeting, walks straight towards the bathrooms. A couple of customers walk in, and because I'm busy with them, I assume the man may have walked out without me knowing. 12:01, and my sister shows up. Thank God. The car was still parked outside. She comes in and asks what's up, and I ask if he's in his car. She replies that he isn't. That is when my heartbeat increased. I looked at the bathroom doors where both signs, as there are 2 bathrooms, 1 men, 1 women, were vacant. The little sign would be green. When occupied and locked, the sign would be red. When the bathroom lights are on, you can see the glow from underneath the doorway. The lack of glow made me assume there was no one in either because the lights are motion censored. I told my sister that there appeared to be no one in the bathrooms, so I began locking the doors and shutting off the lights. My sister, with her balls of steel, opened the woman's bathroom. And who's sitting on the toilet? She closed the door and begins yelling at him that the store was closing. A few minutes pass and he's still there, so she pounds on the door, little by little. 12:08. The creep exits the bathroom, grabs a cookie, buys it and leaves. He never even looks me in the eye or speaks. He got into his car right away and hurried off. I finished locking up and met my sister at a Tim Hortons near me. Had my sister not been there, I'm unsure what would have happened in this outcome. I could easily not be typing this out right now. Thankfully, that day at the beginning of my shift, I put in my 2 weeks' notice. I had to work the next night, which was uneventful, but I was still scared to go outside. After telling my parents, and my mum, being the Criminal Minds fan, thought the man may have scanned the property for cameras and went to the bathroom to wait for me to check them during closing time, waiting also for the lights to go out, as he sits there in the dark to then grab me and make a quick getaway. So glad that I'm done working there now. This happened in Thanksgiving of 2011, and I was celebrating at my grandparents' farm in the little town of Seville, Florida, north of Deland. I had had way too much to eat that holiday and was about to leave to drive back to school in Tallahassee when I stopped at the one little gas station in town to fill up before getting on the highway. I had just filled up when a lady walked up to me. She was really ratty looking with crazy blonde dyed hair, but this is the backwoods of Florida, so no judgment. There are really kind people who just look like that in these parts. And she started talking to me about how her car had run out of gas and pointed to a nearby junker parked over near the convenience store, and that if I could possibly give her some extra cash to go home. I usually don't say yes to things like that, but it was the Thanksgiving weekend, so I was feeling extra generous. I told her that I'd be happy to fill up her car a little to get her home. Then it started getting weird. She kept insisting I give her cash and that the car was so empty she couldn't drive it to the pump. I don't know why I didn't leave her right there and then, but again I was in a very good mood and told her if she had a gas can I would put some in that, but that I didn't feel comfortable giving her cash. She kept objecting, but eventually went over and pulled a gas can from her car. I started filling it up when she put her hand on mine and asked, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I told her politely no. She said that she wanted to pay me back somehow for getting her gas and asked if I wanted to come over to her place. I told her no, less politely, but she kept touching my shoulder to thank me and then offered me a hand job behind the station. So I stopped the gas pump, got into my car, and left her there with the gas can. I called my mum a little later and told her about the creepy sleaze encounter. She paused and asked me if this lady had ratty blonde hair and looked like she was on drugs. I confirmed that yes, that is what she looked like. And how could she know? This lady was apparently all over the news. She was a sex worker in town and had been at a party earlier. An exchange had gone south and her baby had been kidnapped by a client of hers and left under a bush in town. She hadn't even bothered to call the police about the missing child until later. They were both arrested and charged. Once when I was a teenager, I was waiting at an abandoned gas station in downtown Akron to meet a dealer to buy some weed. This was in 1993, so payphones were still functional and very common to use. As I was waiting, the payphone in the parking lot began ringing. Bear in mind it was at about sunset on the outskirts of downtown, and not another person was around. Out of curiosity, I picked up. The man on the other line asked, "Is this Chad?" My name isn't Chad, so I said no. The man ignored me and said, "Chad, I want you to do bad things to me." I stated again that I wasn't Chad and asked him what he wanted, if he knew where he was calling. He ignored me again and went into very explicit and specific detail about all the things he wanted Chad to do to him, sexually. I was laughing and told him again that I wasn't Chad. Finally, he said he knew for sure I was Chad and described to me what Chad looked like. He described me perfectly, down to the color of my shirt and what type of shoes I was wearing. I immediately hung up and looked around. There was no one there, not a single soul. I got into my car and got the hell out of there. My husband and I were on a road trip coming back to Louisiana from Iowa. We would drive in 4-hour shifts while the other person slept in the back of the car. It was around 3 a.m., and he woke me up to start my shift. I looked around and didn't see another car in sight, or even a streetlight or building. He had taken an alternate route that he thought would be faster. Finally, we come across a small local gas station with a single light on. It was closed and our car was the only one there. We pull over, and as I'm getting ready to open the car door so we can switch places, my husband tells me to hold on. I look up from behind the back of the gas station, and there's a man wearing rags shambling towards us quickly. Not quite running, which made it even scarier in a zombie-esque way. I told my husband to hurry and drive away. He was intrigued though. He just stared ahead as the guy got closer and closer, and I started freaking out and screaming for him to go until he did. He drove away, and I looked behind us until the gas station disappeared. As far as I could see, the man followed the car at the same odd pace he was walking at until I could no longer see him. Gives me the chills big time. My name is Kaytlyn. I'm a 27-year-old female, and all my life I've had to deal with creepy stares, unsettling smiles, and unwanted advances from pervy older men. But even with that being said, I've never actually felt like I was in any danger of anything, other than a forced and very awkward long conversation at times. That all changed very quickly and unexpectedly one night not long ago. My sister and I are very crafty and love working on projects together so we can share ideas, get opinions, and generally help each other out with whatever we may be working on. Because of this, I go to her house almost every weekend, and we have a great time together. This day was no exception, and my sister and I were up late working on several different projects. It was around 1 a.m. when we decided to go to a gas station nearby to stock up on cigarettes and grab something to drink. On our way to the Circle K down the road from her house, I noticed her car was on low gas and asked her if she wanted me to park at the gas pump to go ahead and get gas as well. She said we might as well. So whenever I got to the store, I pulled up to one of the pumps closest to the road. A bad mistake on my part, I would soon realize. After the cliché sibling battle about who was actually going to go inside, I left the car, said something smart to my sister, and turned to walk towards the store. As I approached the front of the store, I took a moment to observe my surroundings, as I could sense that the atmosphere had changed slightly. The store was pretty vacant for the city my sister lives in, especially for a weekend night. I noticed that there was one older man sitting on the front sidewalk of the store. As I walked past him, I looked and gave him a friendly smile and nod of the head that's well known here in Georgia. Inside the store was a much different scene. There still weren't many people, just a couple and the cashier, but the couple alone made it sound like the store was full of people. They were engaged in a very heated and somewhat comical, at least to the cashier and I, argument that seemed to only make sense to them. After finally being able to pay for my things, I wished the cashier good night and turned to walk outside. Immediately once outside those doors, the whole world around me felt heavier. I started to quickly walk, scanning my surroundings, looking for the threat my body was telling me was present before my brain even really knew what was happening. And that's when I saw him. The same man that I had passed on my walk inside, now standing off to the side and staring directly at me. The feeling that I instinctively felt shocked me, as I had never felt like this before, like I was someone's prey. His eyes were fixed on me with a type of malice that still makes me shudder. I turned and started walking at a brisk yet calm pace. I was afraid running would escalate the situation. He started walking when I was at an angle. As I passed him, I watched him in my peripheral vision, while he quickly and silently turned and started following me to the car. So many scenarios ran through my head in such a short amount of time. I didn't want him to know I knew he had gotten behind me, as it made me feel like I had the upper hand. he wasn't going to surprise me. As I watched him, his eyes never wavered, nor did his look of hatred. I was terrified. I had no clue what this man had in store for me, but everything inside me was telling me it wasn't good. At this point, I was just hoping the man would turn around and give up whatever he was planning to do. But I needed something to get me out of this situation. Little did I know that even from inside her car, my sister could sense that something was off. She had been watching since I walked out the store and was leaning out the window and staring down the man following me, pepper spray in hand. As soon as he looked towards the car to see if I was completely alone or not, he was met with some serious crazy eyes from her. If that wasn't enough, thankfully at the same time another car pulled up to the gas pump right behind us. Seeming flustered, the strange man kind of staggered off to the side, and before walking back towards the store, he made sure to give me one final look. When they say if looks could kill, this is the kind of look they're talking about. We quickly pumped our gas and peeled off. After finally getting away and the adrenaline leaving my body, I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't help but think about what this man wanted from me or with me, why he was following me all the way to the car if he wanted to rob me. I've never felt so threatened in my entire life. I don't know what would have happened to me that night if I would have been alone. Thank goodness for my sister and the random person that just needed gas. Be careful out there. The world is a crazy, scary place. You never know who may be watching you or what plans they may have for you. I'm a shift manager at a gas station, and I'm a woman in my 20s who's 5'something. I get the attention of all sorts of creepy men in the middle of the night. One night I was speaking to a customer, asking him how he was, and he begins to tell me about a fight he had with his girlfriend. I honestly didn't care, but I'm customer service all day, so I sit and listen, or better yet stand and listen, and give him some advice and send him on his way, considering it's about 2 a.m. I don't really think much of it, considering that it's a common occurrence and there's nothing I can really do about it. For the next 3 nights, this man, who before the first initial night had never come into the store before, showed up and would not leave without a full conversation with me. Mind you, this is during the times we live in today, so I'm really not trying to stand and talk to someone less than 6 feet away for more than 15 minutes. Despite it being the middle of the night there's a lot of work to be done. I'm on the 4th night outside, changing the trash bags in the gas station trash cans, as well as the runs directly out front. Next thing I know, there's that dude, the same one from the last few days, and he starts a conversation with me. Whatever. But when I try to lose them by turning a corner and collecting the bag for the next trash can, he follows me very closely. He then tries to get me to look at something inside of his car. Eventually I signaled my cashier through my eyes that I'm uncomfortable. Beforehand, we had talked about this guy, because it's not a unique situation at all. So she eventually comes out and says that my other person needs help doing whatever, and I say goodbye to the dude and go inside. He did not follow me back in. The next day, we're looking out for this guy and how damn creepy he is. Throughout the whole night he didn't show up, which is awesome, but at 6 a.m. right before I was leaving and handing the keys off to the next manager, that same manager called me over saying there's a call for me. I'm not the only manager there, so they had to know my name and ask for me specifically. I answered the phone and said this: "Thank you for calling Line Gas. This is Helen. How may I help you?" "Hey, I've been a regular customer of yours for a while now, and I'm asking to call if I could go down on you if I give you $500. "What?" He repeats himself. Then I hung up. In shock, I turn to my boss. The other manager who is there says, I was just asked if I'd let this guy go down on me for $500. My boss, a middle-aged white guy, goes, $500? You can get way more than that. needless to say, I don't work at that location anymore. I started working part-time at a local gas station convenience store over the summer of 2016 to earn some extra money while attending college. When I was hired, I was informed that female employees were never scheduled to work overnight shifts for obvious safety reasons, which I was relieved to hear. I wasn't so much worried about my safety, but I was concerned about getting enough sleep before classes. It wasn't long before I found myself dreading the days I had to work though, as the job turned out to be much more difficult than I had anticipated. We were always short-staffed, which forced us to constantly multitask between running cash registers, preparing food, keeping eyes on pumps, cleaning, stocking, etc. To make matters worse, the two women who managed the place were awful in every way, and I frequently found myself biting my tongue and talking myself out of quitting. I was especially on edge when they cut our 15-minute break down to 10, as I never seemed to have enough time to use the restroom or smoke a cigarette fast enough. But it wasn't until several annoying encounters with a regular called James that I finally started to break. James was younger than me, maybe late teens or early 20s, and he thought he owned the place. Perhaps being the grandson of one of the managers gave him a sense of entitlement with people there. But the first time I met James, he approached the counter to purchase some chewing tobacco. As I was ringing him up, I asked to see his ID, and he told me who he was related to, but I politely asked again to see his ID, because I was new. Another employee overheard our conversation and assured me that he was old enough, so I went ahead and rang him up. Staring at me intently the whole time, he looked me up and down, looked at my name tag and said, "Mindy, that's a pretty name." I thanked him for the compliment and gave him his dip, but he continued talking to me and asking me several personal questions. He wanted to know where I lived, what my last name was, and whether or not I had a boyfriend. Meanwhile, a long line had formed behind him, and not trying to be rude, I said something like, "Sorry, there's a line behind you," and I casually motioned the next customer to move up. But James didn't leave. He simply stepped to the side and continued talking to me, and watching me as I rang each customer up. I was immediately uncomfortable, and it was unsettling for me. But I did my best to pretend like I wasn't being bothered, even when his persistence escalated and another co-worker told him to leave me alone. James soon began to make more appearances after that, the second time being with his girlfriend and another male friend by his side. Oh, he had a girlfriend, and I was very confused when he started flirting with me again, right in front of her. Oddly enough, she didn't say a word, so I brushed it off and played along, assuming he's just the goof that my co-worker said he was. But when he sat in a booth with his sidekicks at the back of the store, I could feel his eyes trying to burn holes through me. Over time, I grew more suspicious of James, as I would witness him do things and say countless things to hurt others. I knew he was annoying, but I had learned to brush it off as an all-in-good-fun type of humor. But when I caught him making fun of another co-worker to her face, all I could feel was anger towards him. I removed her from the situation by taking her place at the register, as I could tell she was very hurt and embarrassed by his comments, and by doing so it was apparent to James that I didn't approve. He would continue to cruelly harass this poor girl, and even some of the customers who came in, but trying to make him stop was like scolding a child. I didn't lash out at him though, I just began to ignore him. James then started playing these heated games with me while I was working. He would take soda and candy, walk out without paying for it, and come back in the store and say that I forgot to ring up loud enough for everyone to hear. One night he even filled up his gas tank and took off without paying for it, before returning to say he forgot to pay. He knew he'd always get away with it because Granny was the manager. By this point it wouldn't have surprised me if he really was stealing gas and food from the store, but there was something very dark and strange lurking behind his goofball facade, and I avoided him like the plague, though it was very hard to do at all times. One day while I was working alone with another co-worker, we were very busy with tasks as usual, when lo and behold James walked in by himself. I muttered under my breath, "Pain in the ass," and walked straight back into the freezer to finish what I was working on earlier, and he followed me inside the freezer. I didn't know he was there until he walked right up behind me and asked me why I didn't greet him anymore. Startled, I jumped and quickly turned around, grabbing my chest, and asked him what the hell he was doing back there. He laughed, and I told him I was busy, and reminded him that only employees could be in this area. He ignored everything I said, and instead proceeded to ask me personal questions, just like he did on the first day I met him. "You never told me where you live. I'm curious about you. I just want to know. Tell me where you live." He was moving closer and closer towards me, literally backing me into the corner of the freezer. "Are you afraid of me, Mindy?" he asked. I tried to push past him, telling him to move, but he kept stepping in front of me to block my way out. "Not until you answer me," he said. I started calling out for my co-worker, who showed up and gave him hell for being in the freezer. I was finally able to push past James, and I made my way to the front counter, where I looked at the clock and saw that it was time for me to go. I gathered my things and punched out as quickly as I could, but James followed me out to the parking lot. I swiftly got into my car, but James had managed to grab the top of the car door before I was able to shut it. "Come on, let me see your ID." "No," I repeated before I found myself practically begging for him to let go of the door so that I could go home. Then he grinned at me and said, "Don't make me follow you, Mindy." Chills ran down my spine, knowing how bold of a person he was, and considering the fact that he had literally just cornered me in the freezer only minutes ago. I highly expected him to follow through. Threatened by visions of what my drive home might soon be, I became angry. I looked at him dead on before shouting, "Let go of my door and stay the hell away from me." I then grabbed the door handle and ripped the door shut as quickly as I could. He tried yanking on the door handle from the outside to open it, but luckily I locked the doors in time. He continued knocking on my window asking to see my ID, but I started my car and backed away from him. I turned the wheels and hightailed it out of there, while he just stood and watched me speed off. I was never so glad to finally get away from him, but I was paranoid the whole way home, thinking he would possibly catch me up on the road, even though I never saw his vehicle behind mine. I would end up quitting the job after this. I didn't care that my hiring manager was pissed about it. I'd had enough of everything, and dealing with James was the last straw. I didn't bother explaining anything to my manager, because it was apparent to me that James was probably never held accountable for anything he did wrong in his life, and that he likely never would be. I never saw him again after that, and I hope I never do. James was a jerk, a clown, and a joker, but borderline psychotic. I really hope that in the future, someone calls him out on what he's doing, that he stops behaving like a bully, and he gets the reality slap in the face that he so desperately needs. I worked night shift at a gas station, and was just packing things up for the night around 10, when this old lady wobbled in with a really rough-looking cane. She looked at me and asked if we had something indistinct, like batteries, but I think it was rather inane. I'm not sure. As I was leaving, I handed the responsibility of the customer over to my manager, and in the few minutes when I gathered my things and was starting to leave, I asked my manager if he'd seen her as I left, and he hadn't. No biggie. The next day I was seeing my grandmother, who was going through the obituaries, when finally she came to a friend of hers. Among the list was the spitting image of the woman who I had just seen, reported to have died almost 2 months prior. I worked at a gas station when I was 17, and I happened to be the only person on shift that night. A man came into the store wearing shorts and a jacket but no shirt. It being cold outside, it was a very surprising selection of attire. He limped around the store muttering to himself, bought a coffee, and told me to say hello to one of the regulars, Pam, and then leaves. An hour later, Pam came in, and when I was ringing up her items, I told her the guy said hello. She had a confused look on her face, so I tried describing the man to her. While I'm describing him, her face goes ghostly white, and I asked if she was okay. She said yes, but then proceeded to pull out her phone and call her husband, and told him to lock the doors and call the cops, that she'd be home in 3 minutes, and rushed out. I don't know what happened after that, but it still scares the crap out of me. She's come in a bunch of times, but we've never spoken about it after. Maybe it was an ex-husband who had a vendetta and wanted to do something, but I don't think I'll ever find out. This story is from my old gas station in North Lincolnshire, England. It's on a main road near a car dealership. I worked night shift there for years, and I have witnessed several creepy things, but this is the strangest. The station building faced west, and the till, or cash register, was in the west front corner. I would sit and wait for customers. I also had a security camera on the till, one camera in the canopy to get the car registration, and one camera on the north side facing east towards the exit of the station. One camera on the back building facing north, and the last camera over my head. Well, it was 2009 in early spring, not long after 3 a.m., and I'm just waiting for customers. I'd finished my duties and having lunch at about 3 a.m. when I noticed something on the exit camera. A tall, huge black mass, dark in the center and fuzzy around the edges, that was 7 feet tall and floating 3 feet off the ground. It walked across the exit road and vanished into the wall I was facing. This freaked me out, but to make sure I wasn't seeing things, I checked the CCTV with access to all cameras. I found the clip and yes, it was there, recorded. And it was on the other cameras too, 4 in total. It recorded the mass coming from the dealership next to the station, went through a chain fence, over our entrance road, over our lawn, over the exit road and into the wall of the building. No cars went by. I didn't get another customer for the next half hour, and he drove in from the other road entrance. We had the tape for months, but it was taken away when CCTV was upgraded from VHS to digital, and the station was sadly demolished some years later. I have no clue what that was, but it was not the first nor last paranormal incident there before I left, 15 years ago now. I used to work at a small neighborhood gas station. I was working an opening shift at 6 a.m. with my best friend / co-worker. We were doing our normal opening stuff, and as the sun came up, I went to get some ice from the back. For reference, the gas station building used to have a drive-through, so we have a kind of window in the back. I glanced at the back window and realized there was literally a bloody handprint on the black window. I inspected it closer, and there were smudges of blood around the window handle that looked like someone was definitely attempting to slide it open. We were really freaked out, so we went to look around other potential entrances near the building. I looked at the window in front and noticed dried blood on the hole where we take money for gas from, outside, like someone was trying to stick their hand in to get something in. I kept looking around and there was also dried blood on the front door handles, plus some splatters on the glass, like someone was pounding on it. My friend and I were both freaking out at this point. Luckily, I had access to the security cameras, and I checked them for any motion detection during the night. Well, it turns out at 5 a.m., there was a motion capture, and we watched a man with his arms covered in blood walk around the store trying to get in. The freakiest thing was usually the store is opened at 5 a.m., but it happened to be a Sunday, so we opened at 6. Really dodged a bullet there. There were police lights in the distance on the cameras, so we called the sheriff. He showed up pretty quickly, watched the security footage and confirmed it was a guy they picked up just a bit after 5:30. Craziest thing to happen to me in the 3.5 years of working at the gas station. I wondered what happened to the man and was lucky enough to be filled in. Turns out he had attempted suicide and was looking for help. The sheriff picked him up and took him to the hospital. He managed to live. He was on something apparently. Pretty sad. I was on a solo road trip several years back and had fancied that I could make an 18-hour drive in one go. I was wrong and started to pass out at the wheel, so decided I needed a nap somewhere. The closest thing for many miles was a little gas station set off a mountain in the middle of nowhere. Just dark landscape as far as you could see, and some truckers ahead and behind on the road. There was one car at the station that I assumed belonged to the clerk. I parked where I was still illuminated by the gas station lights, but away from the main parking spaces, so that no one would need to pull up next to me. I set an alarm for 45 minutes and figured I'd see how I felt. I awoke suddenly and glanced at my wristwatch. About only 20 minutes had passed. When I looked out of my driver's side window, I found myself making eye contact with a man. A truck had pulled up about a space away from my car. There was no passenger, and the driver was on his passenger side of the truck with his front and back passenger doors open. He had a long chain in his hands and seemed to have been pulling it from the back of his truck while watching me sleep. A second after we made eye contact, he froze and stood still as he stared right at me. Then he began to quickly pull at the chain and step towards my window while not breaking eye contact. My keys were still in the ignition, so I made a hasty exit. As I pulled away, I noticed in my rearview mirror, and the man had moved to the back of his truck and rested his forearms on it as he watched me drive off. I can't be sure he was doing anything nefarious, but there was no need for him to park next to me when I'd parked out of the way. He didn't need to watch me sleep or make intense eye contact, didn't need to step towards my window with that chain. I'm not sure what was happening with the chain because there was nothing in the bed of his truck visible or around the truck that would call for the need of a chain. Definitely didn't need to stop to see what he was doing and watch me drive away, which leads me to believe there was definitely something dark going on there. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Welcome to the 33% Club. That's right, only 33% of you make it to the end of a video, ever. That's pretty cool. Thank you for making it this far. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's collection of scary stories, even if perhaps it wasn't what you were voting for. I'm sure that military stories will be back soon, and even school stories for those who voted for them. Well, I think that wraps everything up for today. Not, of course, without saying a huge thank you, as always, to my members and patrons who get exclusive stuff for signing up to either. Links to both can be found in the description. I've actually got a series of interviews with my wife that are pretty fun, answering all kinds of silly questions over on Patreon. They're released every 2 weeks, and I hope you like them. They're pretty fun to do, and I hope that you enjoy listening to them. But with that being said, I think we better wrap things up here. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.